then. Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Okay. The most important thing that we knew before today about the Christie, New Jersey bridge scandal was this email sent from Governor Christie's Deputy Chief of Staff, Bridget Ann Kelly, to a Christie appointee at the Port Authority saying, for some reason, quote, "It's time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee." David Wildstein, the Christie appointee at the Port Authority, which controls the George Washington Bridge, the busiest bridge in the world, responded to that apparent order by saying, "Got it." That was the most important thing that we knew before today. For color, before today, we also had Mr. Wildstein and somebody else unknown texting back and forth about their glee, their delight, that Fort Lee, New Jersey had been turned into traffic hell for a week, that school buses were trapped in the gridlock and kids could not get to school on the first day of classes. They are the children of Barbara Buono voters. Don't feel bad. They're the children of Democrats. It is not wrong that you are smiling at the suffering that we have caused them. We had that before today. Today, with the release of more than 2,000 pages of documents, which the legislature obtained under subpoena in their investigation of the bridge shutdown, today we learned quite a bit more. After that mid-August instruction from Governor Christie's office that it was time to cook up something terrible for Fort Lee in the form of traffic problems, we now know that within the Port Authority, the traffic engineers were asked to provide a few different scenarios for how exactly to do that to Fort Lee. Under what appears to be the guise of a traffic study, the chief traffic engineer proposed 3 different scenarios for messing with the access lanes onto the George Washington Bridge. 3 scenarios in essentially descending order of hellishness. The proposed plan from the engineer that would have the worst impact on Fort Lee would be a plan that would merge all of Fort Lee's access to the bridge down to 2 lanes. Not good enough, apparently. Because the next day, the engineers come back to the issue. Look at this email. The next day. Here, Mr. Wildstein, as requested. Attached is the modification to the plans from yesterday. As you can see, our plans for unleashing hell on Fort Lee are now significantly more draconian. Per your request, we have made additional modifications to our menu of options. Now, as you will see, we have come up with a 1-lane option as well. Instead of the worst case for Fort Lee being merging all of its lanes down to 2 lanes, quote, one additional scenario could be a merge down to 1 lane. Yeah, twice as bad. Down to 1 lane. Does that seem better? The chief traffic engineer says he is advised that, yeah, in fact, they picked the 1-lane option. They have planned to implement the 4th plan, the one they were asked to come back with when they didn't come up with a worse enough plan on the first go-round. They're going down to 1 lane. That'll show them. That email was sent on Friday, the Friday before the traffic jam was put into effect on Monday. Over that weekend, the Christie appointee at the Port Authority, David Wildstein, who seems to have been orchestrating this whole plot, during that weekend, he sent a cheery note back to the governor's office. Quote, "I will call you Monday a.m. to let you know how Fort Lee goes." The governor's deputy chief of staff responds. David Wildstein lets the bridge manager on the George Washington Bridge know as well. He says, "I personally will be at the bridge early Monday morning to see this."
And these are system emails. That's why they're not redacted.
Guys to do,
you know, it's Durando.Robert, you know,
we put it into effect. And then Monday morning, and Fort Lee has
state.nj.gov.
The whole thing is underway. And
same with this. So my theory is the Gmail. Go outside of the system for some rogue activity.
And see how it looks. I'm going to go tour my work. And of course, we know how it looks. See the guy out of his car there? That's because he hasn't moved in a long time. It's safe to get out of your vehicle. You're in gridlock. We know how it looks. It's disaster, just like it was designed to be. Before 9 a.m. on that Monday morning, the first day of the shutdown, the Port Authority Police Department reporting not just heavy bridge volume, but also delays on local streets. Right, local streets, because of course the local street traffic in Fort Lee can no longer get onto the bridge. That was 8:53 a.m. Less than 20 minutes later, the bridge manager is emailing David Wildstein again. Just got off the phone with the Fort Lee police chief, who is not happy about our new traffic pattern. He's particularly upset that no one from the bridge had the courtesy or the neighborly intent to call either the mayor's office or the Fort Lee police about testing a new traffic pattern. The police chief asked how he goes about ending this miserable failure. That same first day, 2 more hours down the road, 2 more hours into the commute, and now it's not just angry cops. Now it's getting very serious. Email from one of the TED communications people at the Port Authority to David Wildstein and to his boss, Bill Baroni, another Christie appointee at the Port Authority. How does she know that those were the guys she needed to get in touch with about this bridge thing? Wanted you both to have a heads up, she says. The borough administrator for the Fort Lee area called regarding the increased volume and congestion of morning rush traffic throughout the borough as a result of the George Washington Bridge toll lanes adjustment that occurred. She mentioned that there were 2 incidents that Fort Lee Police and Emergency Medical Services had difficulty responding to: a missing child and a cardiac arrest. How'd she know to email them about that? So the Christie appointees at the Port Authority knew directly, they were advised directly on the first morning that their plan was in effect, that it was literally putting lives at risk. What do you think? We going to stick with the plan? Of course we are. 2:28 that afternoon, that same first day of the traffic jam, 2:28 in the afternoon. Yes, stick with it. The bridge manager emails, quote, "I have been advised by DW," presumably David Wildstein, "I've been advised by DW that we will continue this current operation through tomorrow at a minimum." We knew before this that they did it. Now we know a lot more about how they did it. And we know the governor's office not only called for it in the first place on August 13th, but we know that that same deputy chief of staff in the governor's office was told the weekend before the traffic jam started that it was teed up for Monday. The governor's deputy chief of staff saying great when she learns from David Wildstein that she's going to get updates from him on the fate of poor old Fort Lee once they put their plan into action on Monday morning. It must have been an exciting weekend, right? To know that that little town had no idea what you were about to hit them with. You knew it was coming in advance. Of the 2,040 pages that were released today, the bulk of the rest of it is about handling the feedback and the blowback. Receiving complaints from the public, receiving complaints from the Fort Lee mayor at great length, receiving complaints from the police and the emergency medical services technicians. We see the angry memo from the executive director of the Port Authority, Pat Foy. He does seem to have been out of the loop on this scheme. We see, I think for the first time here, we see that his angry memo putting a stop to this scheme, calling it potentially illegal. We see for the first time, I think, that his angry memo is sent to the governor's office. Not to Bridget Ann Kelly, not to the deputy chief of staff who ordered the whole thing in the first place, apparently, but to another senior staffer of Governor Christie. Someone, incidentally, who he has since tapped to become his new chief of staff. The governor's office directly had notice that this was happening in Fort Lee and that it was a problem and that it was maybe illegal, and they had that notice directly the week that the shutdown happened. I'll also save you the swear words, but we also, in this document dump today, get treated to the governor's spokesman and David Wildstein using all sorts of very New Jersey language about the Port Authority executive director, Pat Foy, who stopped the scheme and who went public about how disgusting he thought it was. They call him all sorts of stuff. Receiving the complaints from local officials and not responding to them, gleefully not responding to them, give him radio silence. That's a big part of today's document dump. And there's also, though, a ton of stuff about the media. We see David Wildstein and the Port Authority getting first a trickle and then ultimately a torrent of questions from the media and requests for documents and formal freedom of information requests for documents. And they turn every single one of them down, every one. The name Ted Mann, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal who reported on this story from the beginning, his name turns up over and over and over again, requesting information from the Port Authority, asking increasingly long lists of hard questions about what happened and who knew about it. Today's document dump shows how at every turn, Mr. Mann was officially stonewalled by Chris Christie's appointees. Joining us now is Ted Mann, reporter for the Wall Street Journal, who's been intensively covering the scandal, who advanced the story with a bunch of scoops since the bridge closure in September, and who is a lot more famous today than you were before because your name has probably been read millions of times today. Hi, Ted.
How are you?
Good. What did you learn today that you didn't know before?
I think our impression of what was happening got a lot deeper, and some of what we had seen only momentarily, and some of the scoops that have come out in our paper and others are strung together in a way we didn't always see. You can see the anger in Fort Lee build towards some of what we had only seen the result of. The letter from the mayor saying, really, there's a public safety emergency, goes a lot deeper when you see these messages piling up saying ambulances are not getting there, kids are loose and we can't, or run away and we can't find them. The other thing that I think you just alluded to is the forwarding of the Pat Foy email to the governor's office. A question Chris Christie didn't answer on Wednesday was why, whether this was a study or not, and it seems it certainly wasn't a traffic study of the like anyone is familiar with, but whether it was a study or not, why everything that was being reported to the people who work for him on the ground in Fort Lee didn't require some sort of corrective action either during or after it happened. And that's a question that they still don't have an answer for. If you get a report that things are this chaotic, why don't you do something to address it, and why don't you figure out why it ever happened in the first place?
Especially when you really did not just find out about it this week, you really did know about it the week that it happened.
At the very least, your senior level staff or some members of it knew.